Closed captioning for the following project provided by.
The time is now 10:48 a.m. All right, sir. State your name, please.
I don't have a name.
What do you mean you don't have a name?
I don't have a name. A name is a label of a company or corporation.
Okay. So what do you identify yourself as?
I identify myself as a human being.
Sir, what do people call you?
People call me numerous things. Retarded, stupid, ugly, disgusting, unknowing, abandoned their existence, dead weight, repulsive, attractive, Steve Urkel.
Okay, stop it. That's enough. Now, I'm not letting you leave here until you answer some questions. Is that understood? Now, what's your race? What's your cultural background?
Don't have one.
What do you mean you don't have one?
I'm not attached nor associated with any invalid nomenclature that's counterproductive to the biological system classification meant to properly identify multicellular organisms, as well as promulgate the sociological anomaly of race, which is a division of the species that arose as a consequence of geographical isolation and distancing within a species. A division of a species that was meant to divide and conquer a species, i.e. humans. Now for those who fell asleep in biology and science class, pay attention. There are 7, in some cases 8, taxonomic ranks in the biological system classification: domain, kingdom, class, order, family, genus, and species. Anything below species is considered a subspecies, i.e. race, making us less than a human or subhuman, or to the full capacity of animals or extraterrestrials, or primitive beings that lack a central nucleus capable of deductive reasoning and analytical processing. Because according to the U.S. Census, it was around the year of 1890 where the first recorded entry of the term race was added with the nomenclators white, black, quadroon, octoroon, Chinese, Japanese, mulatto, and the grammatically incorrect Indian, thereby incorporating the subhuman standard into our psychological regimen, which is where ideological concepts such as 3/5 of a white person, separate but equal, racial profiling, race mixing, helter-skelter, integration, et al. Come into prominence, completely disseminating the injurious rhetoric of ignorance and prejudice towards the body politic. Before the Revolutionary War, elitism was the premier focus that managed to marginalize an entire demographic of people. Intelligence, finance, commerce, status, education, etc. were the properties of the elite. So, up until the 19th century, slave was the common designation used to describe able-bodied men and women, regardless of skin color, coerced in performing free and manual labor. And were also devoid of intelligence, finance, education, status, genetics, bloodline, other than what they were designated with, as collateral for their capitalistic agendas. So, a man or a woman with pale light skin, limited finances, education, and connections to the elite were slaves or indentured servants. As well as a man or a woman with brownish or dark skin, with the same inconveniences as previously described, since all of these elitist luxuries were prohibited to them. Now, it wasn't until after the war that the focus was not necessarily on economics, but on skin color to perpetuate the substandardization of a species.
Sir, are you aware that substandardization isn't even a word?
Then let me be the first to coin it. Substandardization. The psychological action, operation, or administration of coercive tact designed to make humans deficient, inferior, and or insignificant in quality, status, or function. Now back to it. The idea of color was so pervasive that it eventually ceased from becoming an adjective designated to describe the pigmentation of one's skin, but a condensed attribute of one's status as a human being, a sense of identity, a sense of competitive angst. That one race is superior to that of another, with every advantage one would imagine be that of a collective summit that would reinforce the preponderance of that specific race. And in the aftermath of the mutual belligerency, the victorious race will claim dominion over the land and adjust the maxims, precedents, and canons to better accommodate their own respective interests. But here's a question. What does it mean to be black? What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be Chinese, Japanese, Korean, German, Australian, Portuguese, Spanish, Mexican, Latino, Hispanic, etc.? No, seriously. Because according to physics, color is visible light with a specific wavelength that reflects off of objects and into the cornea, allowing us to see color. Red, orange, yellow, blue, green, indigo, violet, brown, pink, gray are examples of visible light with specific wavelengths. Black and white aren't colors because they don't possess specific wavelengths. Instead, white is the presence of all wavelengths of visible light, while black is the absence of visible light, therefore the absence of all wavelengths. So, for you to identify as black would be to identify as the absence of light. meaning no wavelengths, meaning no color, meaning life. However, your existence is entirely dependent on the absence of multiple spectrums of light, i.e. color. And if color is present, you would cease to exist. You to identify as white would be to identify as the presence of light, meaning all wavelengths, meaning all colors, meaning life. But your existence is entirely dependent on the presence of multiple spectrums of light, i.e. color. And if color is not present, you would also cease to exist. So it's physically impossible for humans to identify as black or white because we are matter. We're physical objects that light reflects off of. There is no black or white, only dark and light. Also, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, German, Australian, Portuguese, Spanish, Mexican, Latino, Hispanic are commonly referred to as ethnicities. These are also examples of adjectives meant to describe a person's country of origin, but like race, has been often used interchangeably to refer to a person's identity or status within a population. When, once again, it's physically impossible for a person to identify as geographic landmasses without transmogrifying your physical appearance into that of a split deviation of the original geographic landmass that you identify as. You cannot transform into a country. And if you can, please also transform to a 78-piece combo with watermelon, biscuits, apple juice, and hot sauce on the side. Oh, and I'm fried you can get me. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. In conclusion, what most people refer to as racism is merely ignorance, prejudice, and discrimination, in that order. Because when one doesn't possess knowledge about the other, ignorance is most likely to develop amongst people, causing people to ignore another group of people and become cynical towards them due to their inability to have knowledge of them in order to enforce power over them. Since knowledge is power, after all. And due to this lack of knowledge, humans opinionate and prejudge in an attempt to belittle and derogate others as compensation for the power that they so characteristically lack. And off of this prejudice, unfavorable, unfair, and unjust treatment ensues over the affected group, known as discrimination. Discrimination is applicable to anyone, regardless of skin color, sex, sexual orientation, gender, status, background, age, affiliation, etc. Also, we don't, nor have we ever needed attached designations to describe stimuli that impacts people all over the world. Black issues, white life, black America, white nationalism, black history month, American history, US dollar, black lives matter, white lives matter, blue lives matter, Latino lives matter, all lives matter, my life matters. Your life matters, my brother's life matters, my sister's life matters, my mother's life matters, my father's life matters. Everybody's life matters, not just yours. Because to place a designation on varying subjects will be to imply a distinction between your subjects and conventional subjects, i.e. what is it about your issues that's different from anyone else's?
Well, blacks are the most disrespected people in this country. Blacks are killed more times by police than any other race. And our people have been enslaved for over 400 plus years.
And you've just proven my point. Your focus is entirely centered around the injustices of the one distinctive populace while limiting your perspectives of all other injustices, when they're all inherently the same thing. And it becomes a competition, a race, a comparison between different groups of people on who suffers the most, instead of a sudden realization of the fact that we're all victims of injustices committed by the elitist power structure, and most importantly, ourselves.
And you're saying all of this to say what?
Race and racism is false, does not exist, has never existed, and is hereby debunked.